Nathan Lawson with JoeFest 2024, coming again to bring another awesome interview. With the recent announcement from Super7 confirming the upcoming O-Ring Joe line, yes, an official line of G.I. Joe figures with similar articulation and design as the nostalgic 1980s 3 3/4 inch Joes, which we all fell in love with. I know I did. We at JoeFest just had to get back with Brian Flynn, CEO and founder of Super7, back in the hot seat. Check out what he had to say. Brian, happy holidays, man.
It's great to be back.
Yes.
It feels like I was just here, like we just saw each other. But since we
like
talked, so much has happened. The world's a different place than it was mere months ago, weeks ago, days ago.
I think it was only like, what, 2 or 3 weeks ago that we were talking. And
Two
we
or
were
three
kind
weeks
of
ago.
pushing some questions here.
Yeah, and you were very specific, like, hey, is this the beginning of O-Ring? And I was like, no, it is not the beginning of O-Ring. It is limited to this. And luckily, we've been asking for many, 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 many years and putting plans together for many, many years. And I think finally, this it wasn't the Trojan horse, but it is, a vehicle with a figure hidden inside.
Yeah.
That allowed, I think, them finally to have people at Hasbro, okay, maybe it will be okay. Maybe it's all right.
Yeah.
So
And I kind of see like a Super 7 trend beginning. Maybe this is my hypothesis. Super 7
hypothesis.
We post info, and then the internet blows up, or at least it did for GI Joe world. You have announced the official, O-Ring production line outside of Hasbro. This is the first time.
Yes.
This has ever happened. First time.
Yes.
Okay, so 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago when we spoke, you couldn't talk about it. Now you can. How
it's
did
not
this
that I
happen?
couldn't talk about it. It wasn't real.
Oh, well, okay. Well, what happened between now and then?
I mean, like I said, when the very first time we ever started talking about G.I. Joe, we were like, hey, we know what to do in O-Ring. And they were like, that's really nice. Guess what? That's what we make, not what you make. So, and we talked to them years and years and years about it. And every time we talk to them and they go, all right, what do you see the future looking like? We'll say, here's what we're doing here. Here's some stuff maybe that you're not thinking about or that we can make that we'd like to look. And then we always throw in like, and if we could do O-Ring, this is what it would look like. And that's just been it's not a hard no, but a polite no every time, because that is, the backbone of Hasbro. That is, they were a toy company until G.I. Joe. Then they became a massive toy company. And we're talking about 12-inch G.I. Joes. And then the 3 3/4 G.I. Joe is really part of that place where it rebounded and brought back Hasbro into that huge global prominence as a toy brand. And it is very much the sacred baby,
Right.
Like, it's not even the right thing. I mean, sacred baby brings up a whole lot of weird things, but
it's always been,
you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's the one thing they've held on to for decades.
They've been very, very tight with it, and rightly so. And like I said, we convinced them with the mothership that it was going to be really great if that can work, because it can, to work with both classic O-Ring as well as reaction.
Right.
And to really drive that point home, it would be really great if we could include an O-Ring, because it is like, here's the bridge between these two worlds that come together in the mothership. And that took a little bit of doing, but they were open to it and they understood why. And I think that once they but it's that same thing where you're like, I don't know if this is going to be okay. I just know it's going to be okay. And then the moment it went out there and it was okay, I think that allowed them to sort of really kind of step back and go, okay, hey, maybe O-Ring as a whole is, it's like, we know you've got, like, this is going to be fine. You guys you're going to do right by us, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of came together really quickly after we launched the mothership. And, we were able to go back and be like, all right, we've made these plans multiple times. Let's, freshen up this little one, put a new, polish it a little bit.
Polish it off, and you've given it to the world.
Back, and what do you think? And then luckily, for the most part, they were like, yeah, this looks really cool. This will be really fun. The fans are really going to get into it.
Yes.
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, and since the last week, Yeah, I mean the internet has really just everyone's talking about this now. I mean, there was already a very large debate about O-rings, kind of in general.
Hmm.
A large amount of debate in relation to the newer, more dynamic or the detailed, articulated type of methods. Why did you choose to do O-ring over, say, the smaller, like 4-inch lines that are more articulated?
I think it's, part once again to the point of differentiation between what we do and what Hasbro does. Um, we very much are existing in a nostalgic collector space. I'm talking to adult collectors, not to say that modern isn't, but like classified modern articulation, that era of G.I. Joe, that is Hasbro's core business. That is what they're doing. And where we've been living, which is very much following what we do with most of our lines, is like, I'm really looking backwards. I'm looking back at the 80s and the 90s and saying, here's the stuff you loved then, redone for today,
Mm,
or line extensions or anything else like that. So going into O-ring, we're focused on that adult collector again.
right.
And so we're going back to the 80s and saying, all right, what did you get? What did you not get? What are the places you haven't gone? What are the worlds that we can explore? And then we can be out there, and there's so much to do. And then that world obviously satisfies a fan base, but it also is completely divergent then from what Hasbro is trying to take to market. Because what we
Gotcha.
don't want to do is be competitive with Hasbro.
Right.
We want to be collaborative with Hasbro. So if they're going up here, working over here next to this, and then as a whole, it's wider for everyone.
Okay.
That
That,
makes any
that
sense at all.
it does actually. It makes
Very corporate sounding, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's very corporate-y, but it makes a lot of sense. Hasbro sees that there is an opportunity for Super 7, and now they have given you that ability to move forward with it. And like you said, it is with the O-ring, the I guess what is now known as the traditional line, even though let's don't talk about the 12 inches right now, but the 3 3/4 inch is the
Yeah.
traditional base model. That's what really took Hasbro onto a global scale when it came to the G.I. Joe figure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I'm trying to think about how you talk about it in that regard. It's just that that's what I grew up on. So that's my G.I. Joe.
Right.
Whereas somebody that's a different age from me grew up with a different iteration of G.I. Joe, and they have different feelings about it. And no one is coming back and talking to me the same way. And I think one of the other things that, in talking to Hasbro, to your earlier question, part of it was like, they didn't quite realize at some point where we're like, hey, we've done 72 reaction figures of G.I. Joe.
It's
And same
impressive.
thing. It's a lot. It's a lot. But you go, oh, hey, 72 figures. And that hasn't hurt our business. It's helped our business. So looking at that, then talking about O-ring, where it's like, oh, okay, this isn't going to take away from this business. It's going
Right.
to be additive to this business. These are all the things that, you have to be able to prove also to them. I have to prove that I understand the G.I. Joe brand, that I know the consumer, that I can deliver on the quality that's expected, that I can come out on time, and that it's additive to the brand and not reductive to the brand. And, I feel like we just kind of finally got at a little bit of a watershed where it tipped over. And luckily it tipped over very quickly. So
It
good
did.
for us.
I tell you personally, I am super stoked about this, and there, you definitely have touched a fan base that I personally feel has been neglected for a while. Because as an O-ring enthusiast, I am an O-ring enthusiast. I love the O-ring line. I've always have. I've always lamented that it hasn't had a better treatment in the past. Just me personally speaking. Now there is, I guess, what you call an O-ring saga that has been inside the G.I. Joe collectors conversations probably since the early 2000s about O-ring production. There's a story about exactly what happened to the original molds, why Hasbro never chose to revisit O-rings until just recently. Now, with these new figures you plan to produce, you are now safely cemented into Super 7 is safely cemented into this discussion. Now, are you ready for some heated debates on the intricacies of O-ring production with collectors as the target audience?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to have that. We're going to, much like everything else, we're going to have our point of view of what we think is the right thing. Because here's the thing, every collector is different.
Yeah.
Every collector might be a year younger or a year older. If your first GI Joes didn't have swivel arms, and then they have swivel arms, you're like, that's cool, but not essential to GI Joe.
Right.
Like, it can be both. If you're a couple years younger, you're like, no way, it has to have the swivel arms or it's wrong. Now, if where you lived in the store and chain that you bought toys from didn't carry certain things, you're like, oh, those characters were never really important. Nobody really had them, nobody played with them. And it's like, oh, wait, over here, it's completely different. It back in the 80s, it was still very regional.
Right.
If you lived in Texas, you might be going to Lionel Play World, or if you're in Boston, you're going to Mr. Big's toy store. Like, you're going to very different places that had different assortments of characters and toys. So everybody's point of view is going to be colored by what they saw and had and their friends had, and going to be colored by what they reacted to.
Right.
So there is no way on God's green earth that I will ever make everyone happy. But instead of trying to make everyone happy, we're going to say, hey, here's the lane that we're working in, and we're going to try to really dial in this lane. I'm sorry if you're a 90s guy, but we're not going to be there for a while. And that's not where we're headed.
Gotcha.
So, and that person will be like, you guys suck. You're doing it wrong. It's terrible. There's so much opportunity over here. Like, the Space Corps line needs to keep going. We need more aliens. And it's like, all right, well, we're not working about that right now. Right now, we're working on this, and then we'll just see how it goes. At the same time, we're pretty deep in the well at this point. If anybody's been paying attention to what we've done in reaction, whether
they have
articulation or not,
yeah,
you got to be like, okay, well, at least these guys know the characters. They know what they need to look like. They know how the packaging should be put together. I have a feeling that for the most part, all those intricacies people will be fine with, because it's not like we're going to be like, we don't like that. Let's not do it. We're not going to put the screw in the back. Who cares about that? Like, it's not going to be that, it's
right.
Like, no, that has to be there.
Right. There is that ongoing discussion, and it does really dive pretty deeply with a lot of different individuals, but there are some overarching, like you've already mentioned it, like straight arm versus swivel arm, and just the articulation components in general. Now, technology has come a long way since the 1980s, particularly with the articulation. The creation of the joint movement evolved with the G.I. Joe O-rings. That's something that really Star Wars, I don't think, ever tried to replicate.
No.
But the processes back then, they were this articulation concept was labeled modern and high tech. Are you going to try to potentially reproduce these concepts, this articulation, or with or without? Or I guess really what I'm trying to say is, with the O-ring figures, are they going to be produced in a more modern version, or are we going to try to do like an injection molding concept principle like they did in the 80s? How true to O-ring production is Super 7 looking to be?
We're going to be true to 1980s O-ring, because that's what we're focusing on.
Right.
If I was focusing on 90s or 2000s or something else like that, then we'd probably look at it differently. But I really look at okay, year 4+ of G.I. Joe is really where it hits its stride. Year 1, we're saving paint apps. That's why you get black snake eyes. We've only got 8 pad prints on this thing. That's all you get. And, straight arm versus swivel arm, you're breaking thumbs all over the place.
Right.
What we're doing is then moving on into, sort of like year 4 is where I feel like you've got higher detail in the sculpt. Mm-hmm. You've got much more paint on the figure, much more elaborate paint apps, but you're not yet to the point where the form of it starts to distort for functionality. I think when you get into some of the later waves, you really start to see the proportions of the figures. they start to change and they start to try like, well, oh, it's a girl, we should really bring in the waist so much more, and we should do this, and what if the shoulders were bigger, and and it's like it starts to get like these bigger hips, the narrower
Right.
thing, that's not really what we're going for. It's like what I'm really looking at is if you are sitting there year 4, year 5, and you went to the store, this feels like it 100% sits right next to the GI Joe that you already have.
Wow. Okay. You're definitely going to, be scratching where a lot of guys have an itch. And I think that with these pieces that just the way that you're talking, I mean, you're basically responding in the way that this debate has a lot of people crying, wanting to see basically O-ring continue. So at the highest of its precipice in the 80s, so like you were saying with the 90s when some of the figures kind of lost the back screw, or because they had spring-loaded components, you're going to be focusing more back into
Yeah,
the
we're not going to make Arctic Dive Batman,
right.
tiger camo. I think that there's just, the same thing. We've talked about it a lot. It's like you got to have rivets,
Yeah.
not plastic. It's got to be a metal rivet. Like, if it doesn't, it just doesn't feel like GI Joe to me. Like I don't look at it and go, oh, GI Joe.
Right.
Like that you see that in the shoulder and
Mm-hmm.
Is it need to be there in this day and age? No. Can I get away with manufacturing it? No. But does that emotionally, when I look at that, does that feel like GI Joe? It probably feels close, but it's not the same as when, I could make that figure without that rivet in the shoulder and you'd be like, that's cool. That's rad. I love that GI Joe. If it has that rivet in the shoulder, you're like, oh, it's got the rivet in the shoulder. And it's
No,
that where it's like those are the things that hit you emotionally, and
yes.
that's what we're really focused on. It's not I'm not selling you steel or rice or industrial goods that have a Bezier curve to supply and demand. I'm selling you something that you do not need.
Right.
So you have to love it to want it. And so I want to make sure that when you see it, it's everything within reason, everything that you want it to be, and hopefully more.
That is really exciting because there have been some very small attempts that I've seen in the past 3 years trying to revive O-ring, but in a more modernized contemporary feel, to where you might have snap-on, kind of bringing in the articulation of snap together or a ball and joint figure, but the O-ring itself seemed to have lost its perspective, and so no one has really been able to successfully reproduce an O-ring, which is kind of odd, I find, because we're talking about 1980s tech.
It's not that they haven't been able to successfully redo it. It's just that you've got a lot of different competing agendas. And to be very clear, who we are as a company and what we do, we're very much catered to a very narrow audience of adults.
Right.
And we're not typically sold in the toy aisle. I mean, yes, we have some locations at Target, and we just got a spot in Walmart. We'll see if we get to keep it. But, there's just some spot in Walmart, but it's like, it's in the collector section and it's one peg. Like, we're not talking about a wall of stuff.
Right.
So if you're talking about a company like Hasbro that is that, their concessions may be O-ring is part of our history, but it's also, how am I getting a 9-year-old to buy this? How am I getting other people to buy this? And so there's a lot of competing interests at play on how that figure gets designed, what's going to work best for the end consumer, and where they're trying to do. And we can't think for a second that we're the only people in the world that are buying this. We're not. And so with where we're coming from versus where a Hasbro might be coming from, because let's face it, like whether it's Lenny or Emily or any of those people, like there are tons of deep diehard toy fans over at Hasbro, and they would love nothing more than to make all of this stuff, but they simply can't. They're making the new Star Wars movie, the new Marvel movie. They're making all this stuff. There's only so many toys you can make. So circling that all the way back around to how we fit in with that now, we spent a lot of years working with Hasbro, gaining their trust that we can do these things.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's that same thing where it's like, hey, I can go talk to this little sliver of people over here it's a significant group of people, but it's not the toy aisle,
Right.
and I can make the thing that they really want, and they believe that we can do it and do it correctly.
Right.
And so when we get into that, why you say, like, what are all these changes and evolutions? They're looking also at what they've been able to do, how they've been able to advance it, how they've been able to make action figures better, in quotes. And then how do you marry these two things? How do I take this thing from the 80s but update it to the 90s, or update it to the early 2000s or the 2010s, to make it something that can cross over and sell to both people at the same time?
Right. And just so that I'm covering all the basics, because I know that there will be some guys that are going to be like, well, you didn't ask about this. But
No.
we're talking about original things. We're talking about bringing them to the 21st century. We're not talking about 3D printing.
No. Why
Just
would we do
making
that?
sure, yeah.
3D printing will eventually be, but like right now, printing it out, having to clip and sand and paint, like, no. That's a lot of handwork still, and it's not the same.
Okay. Just wanted to, I knew that would be like a small crevice, because that is kind of a market that is making its way around the conversations.
I think that's a customizer market at this point still. You're still having to hand make and hand assemble and hand paint those toys.
Right.
So that's not what I'm doing.
There we go. Now, with the announcement, after you announced the O-ring line is coming,
Yes.
what I did was I actually decided to make a post in one of the G.I. Joe rooms, is the G.I. Joe record room, and I asked, with Super7's announcement that an O-ring line is coming, what figures, and this is to the public, are you wanting to see? And reminder that, Super7's.
Here's the list.
Here's the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
739 options later.
I'm telling you, they went crazy with the options.
Yeah.
I think they understand what you're looking to do.
But that is also the point, which is there's so much that hasn't been made yet.
Yes.
So let's get in and start making some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, some of the top ones were just, off the top, Hector Ramirez.
The broadcaster.
the broadcaster. He was on there many, many times.
It's not Julio Rivera.
It's not. Yeah.
It's Hector Ramirez.
Yes.
No.
As much as they want to say, it's not.
Because he's in what, 3 series?
I think he's only about 3 or 4 episodes in there.
4.
Yeah.
I know he's in Gem.
Yeah.
He's in G.I. Joe. I think he's in Transformers.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I don't know if he's in a 4th. But yeah, Hector Ramirez is one of those where everybody's like, oh yeah, Hector Ramirez. I'm like, yes, but if you had a choice on a shelf, are you going to spend $20 on Hector Ramirez, or do you want another Cobra figure? I'm going to go with, you probably want another Cobra figure.
And that's the thing. So speaking of a type of Cobra figure, the Viper, the wiper.
the Viper. The window wiper?
The window wiper.
The Viper is coming. Yeah. It's a classic character. I don't know if anybody is actually going to buy the Viper, but it's a classic moment, but that's the thing, is like, maybe we don't end up with Viper as a toy, but you might end up with Viper as a t-shirt, or you might end up with Viper in someplace else. Like there's a lot of that where we're sitting here talking about very obscure deep cuts because they're funny and everything. And it's like, I make a bad analogy all the time, which is like Van Gogh's Starry Night is a wonderful painting, but it's a shitty coffee mug.
Yeah.
Like it can be a great thing. It just doesn't mean it's right for that particular format. So it's like, oh, it may not work here, but it can work here really well. So, I think we're just going to really jump in and try to do some really fun stuff. Like I said, if people have been paying attention to what's happening in Reaction, they should just be like, there's all sorts of stuff that those guys have done that no one ever thought would come out.
And I think that's where a lot of these ideas came from, is that they are looking at Reaction, and you have another wave that's about to be released.
Yep.
So we know that you have the gas going for Reaction. That's not stopping anytime soon.
No, I mean, we'll slow it down a little bit so that we can bounce back and forth. But yeah, why would I stop? I love those figures.
Right, you have an audience for those, and like you mentioned in our
Yeah.
previous interview about how the history of where that came from and how it has a lot of the uh, aspects from Star Wars and before the articulation actually came about.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, basically, I know that there are a ton of people that are truly excited now that this has happened. Now, the launch date for the O-Ring figures, that's, I believe, fall 2024. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I believe we're talking about October is when it hits shelf,
Okay.
and that stuff might really start coming around September, but September, October-ish, right in there.
All right, I know we are beyond excited to see what Super 7 comes up with, and of course, you know, keeping our ear on every little hint that gets dropped that comes between now and then. The debate will continue. Any
The debate
updates
will
on the?
continue. Like, what are they going to start with? They're going to go really crazy here. Oh, they're going to do the basics here. And like, no, no, there's so much stuff. Like I said, we're going to be touching Sunbow. We're going to be touching Deke. We're going to be touching the comic books.
Right.
We're going to try to get into a bunch. There's just so many great moments and great characters that just have not been done yet. So
It's
there's
exciting.
so
It's an
much.
exciting time to be a GI Joe collector. I'll definitely say that.
If you were a GI Joe collector 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you couldn't have imagined how much stuff there is available to you now. Because I mean, if you're really even talking about the last 3 years or so, not only we were getting into it, but then some of the Mezco stuff came out. Some of the I'm blanking on it, but like all of a sudden, like there was a bunch of stuff. You know, I think Mondo's making 12-inch now for GI
I
Joe.
think so. Yeah.
You know, um, there's statues. Classified has, whatever that was, 6 years ago or whatever, when Classified made its debut. Everybody hated it. Remember, it was the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. Now it's the
Is
biggest line in the world.
very different world now that Classified's the predominant line pushing right now.
Yeah. And so, you have a version of G.I. Joe available for most every kind of collector.
Right.
And some people will want it all. And some people will be like, I buy this, but I don't buy that. And I buy this, but I don't buy that. There's something for everyone. And that's really, what we've been trying to do this whole time is just expand the options and the opportunities for people to get into G.I. Joe again and find the thing that means something to them.
Well, on behalf of all O-ring collectors, I am super excited. Thank you so much for bringing this to the table, and we're looking forward to 2024. Real quick before we head out, any updates on the mothership?
Mothership, obviously, we've got about 10 days or so left. As per every crowdfund on Earth, first couple days it goes really great, then nothing happens, and then we're going to see what's going to happen in the last 36 hours or so.
Yeah.
I feel very good about it only because I know so many people that I know that are like, yes, I need that, and even they're like, oh, I haven't ordered it yet.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff available right now. There's a lot of stuff that's come in from last year that's arriving now. There's a lot of bills due. And I think a lot of it really comes back down to like, I'll pay that bill when it's, rent's not due for another 10 days. I don't need to pay this today.
Right.
So and we'll see. I'm optimistic that we're going to get there. I feel like what we've built is a pretty amazing play set wrapped in a vehicle. I think it's super fun. I think obviously nothing like it has ever existed. And we'll just sort of see what happens. Everybody's guess is as good as mine, but I feel very optimistic that at the very least we're going to hit that lower threshold. And maybe we'll see if it gets higher. I mean, that last Giant Man was a long way off when it got into its last 48 hours, and yet it still cleared it. And I don't know. I don't have any secret behind the scenes magic here. It's like I can see what everybody else is seeing. Like,
it's going to be revealed soon.
On pause right now. It's like,
well, whatever the case may be, we know the Super 7's full throttle right now. I mean, you guys are you're hitting it out of the ballpark, really.
I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best.
And I know it's not G.I. Joe, but I do have to say, Godzilla -1, wow.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie yet?
I haven't seen it, but it is phenomenal. Just the part, everything that I'm hearing coming out about it, and wow.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to be in theaters because it's very limited run. It's
Right.
the Japanese version. It's only subtitled. It's not
Right.
even dubbed. But I would tell you that I went to it. I'm expecting a Godzilla movie. I'm here. We brought the whole family. Went 3 kids with us, and it is the Godzilla part is almost sort of a backdrop to the larger movie,
That's what I've been told. Yeah.
and it's a phenomenal movie. Even my kids were like, "That was awesome!"
Yeah.
Like you are not expecting what this movie is at all, and it is a really, really good movie outside of the fact that it has a giant dinosaur monster in it. And and then the Godzilla parts are epic on their own.
Right.
Like the heat blast, atomic breath thing in this movie is pretty next level. So I would encourage you to go sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you're going to see it on your TV. You go see it.
It's a movie theater movie. It's not meant for
and
home.
it's going to be one of those things where your significant other, you might be like, "Oh, come to this," and they're like, "God, I don't want to go to a Godzilla movie." And it's like, no, and they'll be like, "Oh, wow, hey, that was actually a really good movie."
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're like, "Yeah, it was.
Oh,
Just
man.
happened to have a giant radioactive dinosaur."
Oh, well, Brian, thanks as always. Great to talk to you again, and we're going to see how this runs out and have a happy holidays, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I'm glad I can bring you the O-ring news that you were asking about before, and everybody was speculating.
Yep.
Like I said, I think part of that too is that the speculation from I can't speak to it, but partly I have to bet that some of that speculation from the fans, like, "Oh, they're going to take on O-ring." I'm sure people at Hasbro were listening.
Yes.
So whatever it is, we're here. We're going to get this party started, and we're going to have a whole bunch of O-rings doing this.
Rock and roll, man.
There you go.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.
JoeFest 2024 is beyond excited to see a new line of Joes coming, just like the ones that I currently collect and I have all over my house. Now, 2024 is already turning out to be a fantastic year for G.I. Joe, and we haven't even started the year yet. Make sure that you check out Super7.com, as they wrap up the Cobra Mothership campaign, and of course keep an eye out for more news and information headlines as the new O-ring line begins to come online. I'm Nathan Lawson with JoeFestUSA.com, and I will see you in Augusta, Georgia next year.